Presbyterians Pro-Life, more than 4 decades of helping Presbyterians to think biblically, ethically, and compassionately about all human life. And now, Presbyterians Protecting Life. This is a short history of PPL's mission and just the highlights. 40 years of mission takes too long for one presentation, but I'm going to touch on the who, what, when, and where. First of all, who were the presidents? Eleanor Blizzard was the first chairwoman in 1979. She was elected in the first slate of officers. Reverend William T. Wing Jr. followed her in the next year and served for a few years in the early 80s. But in 1984, Reverend Ben Sheldon was elected and served until 1995, except for 1 year term when Zoltan Phillips served for 1 year. Ben passed off the baton to Don Elliott in 1995, and Don served until 2007. In 2007, Don's church, First Presbyterian Church of Corinth, Mississippi, voted to leave the PCUSA because our bylaws stated at that time that all board members must be members of the PCUSA. Don also resigned as president, and John Sheldon took his place in an interim as interim president until elected later that year in October of 2007 to be the next president of PPL. He continues to be the president until this time. And just an interesting note, John Sheldon is the son of Reverend Ben Sheldon. We've had 3 executive directors. Mrs. Terry Schlossberg was the first paid staff member of PPL, and she was hired in 1986. The story goes that she was a guest at a board meeting, and when the topic of hiring an executive director came up and someone said, who would we hire? One of the board members pointed across the table at her and said, why not her? And so Terry became the executive director, and she served until 2005. In 2005, Mrs. Marie Bowen, that's me, took that role of executive director with fear and trembling and served until 2018. When I found it necessary to leave that position because of my husband's health, Reverend Deborah Holofield was serving on the board of directors, and she had come to the attention of many of us as an outstanding candidate for executive director. And so in 2019, in January, she took over the reins and serves yet until as executive director of Presbyterians Protecting Life. So when and where? In 1976, 3 pastors gathered at Montreat, North Carolina at a pastor's conference, and they had a conversation about their shared concern that the denomination, the Southern denomination, was drifting toward approving abortion. And so they wanted to do something about that. So in 1978, they gathered a few more pastors together, and they had a meeting and became Southern PPL in Decatur, Georgia. In 1979, they were officially chartered as Presbyterians Pro-Life, and they were on their way then to becoming an official nonprofit organization. In 1984, they took that step and became a 501c3 corporation in Georgia. Presbyterians Pro-Life Research, Education, and Care Incorporated, a name that they kept until 2017. The office moved, however, from in 1986 when Terry Schlossberg became executive. She moved the office to Minneapolis, Minnesota, her hometown. When she moved a few years later, the board gave permission to move the office with her to Burke, Virginia. And when I took the reins in 2005, the board agreed to move the office to Allison Park, Pennsylvania. And then in 2012, it was necessary for us to give up our office space in Allison Park, and we became a home office organization. And the office continues to be in my home, and since I have moved in 2020, the office is now in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The most explosive growth for PPL was in the 90s, and our network grew by leaps and bounds, and we were very active in General Assembly activity. Dozens of local chapters were formed. Those local chapters gave fuel to bringing overtures to General Assembly, providing team members at the assemblies, and doing the work of starting abortion, alternative to abortion resource centers in their own presbyteries. They also approached their own congregations about being care churches. The PPL news was expanded during these years to 40,000 in circulation. During those years also, PPL had great General Assembly events with some phenomenal speakers. Beginning in 1984, we've had a presence at every General Assembly of the PCUSA. And in 1985, we had our first exhibit booth there. In 1988, Mother Teresa agreed to come and be our speaker at our event in St. Louis, Missouri. Her speech touched the hearts of commissioners, and they approved a decision to authorize a new study on abortion. In 1992, that study came as a policy statement to the GA, and Bernard Nathanson gave a passionate testimony about his own movement from abortionist to pro-life advocate. In 1996, Chuck Colson again challenged us to be the church in proclaiming life and working to defend the unborn. In 2000, Thomas Torrance wrote a wonderful address that we have published in a little booklet. He was unable to attend because of illness, but his address was read by Reverend Garrett Dawson, a PPL board member, and inspired many. Continues to inspire through the written form of it. And Frederica Matthews Green was our speaker in 2004. So along with these great speakers, we've had some highlights of policy success in our General Assembly work. In 1986, for example, when the presbyteries were urged to consider designating at least one church in every presbytery as a resource center for alternatives to abortion, Presbyterians Pro-Life became active immediately in helping chapters and local congregations to be that resource center. In 1997, partial birth abortion was declared to be of grave moral concern after coming to the assembly for a number of years and not being acted upon. In 1998, the Board of Pensions finally, 6 years after the new policy, established a relief of conscience program so that churches would not be paying health dues that would be covering abortion if that was against the conscience of the congregation. Also approved in 2001 was a dialogue on the end-of-life issues, and in 2001 also a voluntary adoption fund was established. In 2006, the late-term abortion statement said, "We affirm that the lives of viable unborn babies, those well-developed enough to survive outside the womb, if delivered, ought to be preserved and cared for and not aborted." The entire language of that statement is far more ministry-oriented than the 1992 policy statement and was an encouragement to us. 2008 required, the commissioners required an annual relief of conscience report from the Board of Pensions that has since become formatted as an online report, and now all the churches who have have asked for relief of conscience are shown on that website, so that they know that their money is being diverted to the adoption fund from the coverage of abortion. Equipping through education. PPL has been equipping long before our mission statement said it. We have been producing pamphlets, brochures, bulletin inserts, papers, press releases, statements. We have published a periodic newsletter, which is now in the form of an e-newsletter. We have handed out daily delivery newsletters at every assembly. We have position papers on abortion, euthanasia, sexuality, and stem cells that address these cultural issues from a biblical perspective. And we have created Bible studies on life. Adult curriculum on life issues was published a number of years ago, and Created, Loved, and Called, a video series, was produced later. 2 books were written by executive directors of PPL. Not my own, Abortion and the Marks of the Church, was co-authored and published by Elizabeth Ochtemeier and Terry Schlossberg. Pregnant with Promise was written by myself, and that was a Bible study on the character of God as told through the pregnancy stories of the Bible. Equipping for advocacy has been another piece of our constant effort. And Board of Pensions, I've already mentioned, the Relief of Conscience program happened because we kept at it. Dozens of overtures were written by us, or we helped commissioners write them, and they were brought to GA under our guidance and instruction about the processes. Commissioner orientations were held prior to every General Assembly, helping commissioners know what the process is, what to look out for, how to be successful. And we welcomed them in our PPL hospitality suite for free lunch, where we had work groups and sometimes late into the night. We assisted them in advancing overtures, and we hosted them for dinner at the PPL event. So General Assembly teams came on their own time, at their own expense, published and passed out daily deliveries, some of them working all night. They worked in the PPL booth as volunteers, offering free resources and talking with people and answering their questions. They gave testimony, supporting life in committees, open hearings. Everywhere you looked, PPL team members shone a light on life. And we've always been equipping for ministry. We know it's not enough to just say abortion is morally wrong, that we must equip churches to bring ministry to women that is tangible help and assistance. At the end of life, we need to equip churches to know how to help those who are dying or who are struggling in their later years, to know that their life has value and meaning and that they are loved and cared for. So we have established years ago the shepherding churches or care churches who promise to walk alongside a woman in pregnancy to meet her every need as long as she has need. Assisting chapters and churches in establishing resource centers or pregnancy centers is another part of what we have done. And we have published ministry packets on adoption, abstinence, and abortion recovery. We've had some challenges, as I may have already mentioned, alluded to. First of all, the exodus of supporting churches from the PCUSA that began in 2007 continues, although it's pretty much peaked in 2012. But through that time, we not only lost funding, but we lost volunteers. Our GA team members disappeared. Our chapter leaders disappeared. Our commissioners disappeared and went to other denominations. They didn't disappear. They just went to a place where they felt was a better fit for what they believe. So board turnover mirrors that as well. There were a number of people who went to another denomination and resigned from the board as a result. How do we build a network across denominations? And particularly in COVID times, when we have no opportunities for large events, and when churches do not invite us to come because they can't mount an event in their church. These are big challenges, and we are still working that out. Transition began in 2011 seriously when we changed our policy regarding denominational membership for our board members. We changed our bylaws so that now anyone who is a member of a Presbyterian and Reformed church can be a candidate for our board. And from 2012 to 2016, we began expanding our work, adding the EPC, ECO, the PCA, RPCNA, and the ARP in our initial expansion into other Presbyterian and Reformed ministries. We have a new name, Presbyterians Protecting Life, and we have a new mission statement. Compelled by the gospel, PPL equips Presbyterians to champion human life at every stage. And we have a new website, still at ppl.org. We have new executive leadership. Deborah Holofield is leading us to put fresh words and a fresh look and a more online presence in our ministry. And we have a new office location, which is much less paper, much more online. Where do we go next? Well, that depends on our board of directors. That depends on you.